Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Stuart Diamond, who spoke just wonderfully before me, Mr. Ruben Banerjee, Indranil Chatterjee, Mahalakshmi, Shri Piyush Goyal, Honorable Minister with us, members of the press, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. It's just a wonderful pleasure being here with all of you and being on this very wonderful function, which we call the Outlook Business Leading Edge 2019. I'm in the midst of the merger between Capital First and IDFC Bank, the merger went through about 20 days ago, and yesterday was the listing of a new bank. And therefore, I was just very busy dealing with that. But I asked Mahalakshmi before coming here, what do you really want me to speak about? And she told me, can you speak about resilient India? Whether you want to come from the role of a leadership, or you want to come from the role of economy and how it can build towards a resilient India. I asked her who's in the audience. She said, okay, a couple of ministers will be there and Mr. Goyal could be there. So I just thought to myself, why don't I come from the role of what is the role a government can play in that process of building a, let me call, a developed India or a resilient India, whichever way we put it. All of us, when we travel to UK, we travel to US, Singapore, Australia, Canada, Switzerland, we always tend to see beautiful, neat and clean roads, wide roads, infrastructure, excellent institutions, educational institutions, lush green educational institutions, I must say, and just all things looking so pretty and perfect. And then we ask ourselves, when is it that we can get there? I certainly think that, and I ask myself this question all the time. So when we say resilient India or a developed India, we mean all that which affects all of us, not just as for our feelings and the ego, but also in the life of the common person of the country. Now, the first theme, when we come to this discussion is that almost all these countries are private sector economies. And one significant fact of private sector economies, it just makes the nation and the resources that much more efficient. Now, if private sector economies are going to create the kind of countries we talked about, developed economies, and in fact is, let me say, one of the causal factors for making a developed economy, then what is the role of the government and what can the government do to enable such a development of the country? Now, on this front, I must say that one of the significant roles of the government is to create a facilitative environment, facilitative environment for developing businesses, build businesses, maybe facilitative environment for setting up hospitals, a facilitative environment for setting up schools, a facilitative environment, and not just get into the act of doing it itself. I think we all experimented, maybe many countries of the world experimented with the concept of the government doing many of these businesses themselves. I think pretty much disastrous effect. And those very few countries which are still stuck with that model, we just know where they are. And Venezuela and the inflation of over 100,000%, it is still a telling story of even today's times of where those countries can, on those economic models can take us. Now, on this role, I must say that our government has done an absolutely wonderful job in implementing and creating a facilitative environment for us. All of us should be very happy that right in our generation, we got one government which had an absolute majority, which actually pulled off the GST. Now, GST undoubtedly is an extraordinary reform and certainly a very facilitative environment. It showed a sort of entrepreneurial spirit. And of course, if the GST had not been implemented at that point of time, we just never know how many lobbies could have worked on the ecosystem. And even if it had been stalled for maybe 3 or 4 years, then we never know again when we would have that sort of an opportunity within our lifetime. So that is one significant reform that is now going to affect our lives now and forever. The number 2 significant reform that has happened, which will in fact improve our lives for many, many more years to come, is the impact on digitization. Well, Aadhaar, for example, founded sometime in 2010, and between the last 5 years, we have seen significant development of the digital ecosystem. And on that digital ecosystem, many businesses and ecosystems have pinged into it, and therefore multiplied the effect of the digital economy, in fact, supported by Aadhaar. Now, I must say, just in the last few years, we've had UPI in 2016, we had Bharat Bill Pay Service in 2017, we had UPI 2 in 2018. Such is the pace of this development on this front. And just to tell you 3 or 4 very significant changes that this electronic platform India has developed has done to our life. ENAM, which is a government-enabled marketplace, a very significant initiative. TREADS, which is an MSME bill discounting portal on which there are close to about 30,000 buyers and 120,000 sellers. Then there is the e-way bill, which is a very significant development. Then there is 11 million businesses or more now coming on the platform of GSTN. And then, of course, there is Bharat Bill Payment Service. The point I'm trying to point out to you is that once the foundation of a new digital India has been laid, just so many services of the examples I told you are now pinging into it and are now making digitization of the country really happen. Now, this has very profound impact on our lives, if not immediately in the next few years, but certainly by the time our next generation comes up and lives in this new India, we will see a very significant development. In fact, in the last few years alone, the amount of cleanup that has been done in terms of the NPA recognition of the banks and in terms of being able to recognize the losses as they are, take it into the balance sheet, and therefore, and also implement the IBC, the bankruptcy code. All of these factors come together to say that the next 5 years within our just immediate purview is going to be far better and is probably going to grow at a much faster pace than we saw in the last 5 years because the platform has been built for the next 5 years. Therefore, no matter which way this go, we should be genuinely very optimistic over the next 5 to 7 years. Now, talking of 5 to 7 years, I took some numbers for you, which certainly inspired me, and I hope it inspires every one of you. Just 5 numbers for you. We say in 2025, India's GDP will be $5 trillion. Indian private consumption will grow from $1.3 trillion today to $3 trillion in 2025, which is just 8 years from now. The investments in the economy will increase from $700 billion to $1.8 trillion in 2025, which is just 8 years from today. Gross household financial savings, 10% of GDP is about $250 or $260 billion today. In the next 8 years, gross financial savings will go to 14 to 15% of a $5 trillion economy, which would be $750 billion. And imagine growing from $250 billion. So to all the entrepreneurs assembled here and all looking to forward as to what is around the corner for all of us and so on, definitely there is a very big story coming coming to all of us. And of course, it is our role, just as we talked of the role of government, to encourage private enterprise and to encourage ease of doing business, as this government has shown to us over the last many years. What we can not only participate in this growth, but also contribute to the kind of numbers we talked about is going to be some of our significant opportunities. Lastly, since we have the opportunity of the Honorable Minister with us, I have a proposition which I have been wishing for a very long time, and in fact have spoken at a couple of forums where I got an opportunity. When we talk of a resilient India or a developed India, we'd always wish to see a resilient or a developed India at the lower end of the pyramid. Right now, in the last 5 years, let me say the government has done a lot of those initiatives, starting with the Mudra loans and the facilitative environment and the GST to enable the ecosystem, bottom of the pyramid, in the financial sector or in the business sector. We know there are close to about 50 million enterprises creating jobs for over 110 million people, but having credit for only 25% of the Indian lending is both those enterprises. One comment which I'd have is that can we have a tax structure which is progressive and not flat 30%? What that would mean is that small entrepreneurs will get to pay a lower tax, and larger enterprises like ours or of any other large corporates, maybe the top 2,000 of them in the listed on the Bombay Stock Exchange, can probably pay the P tax rate, whether it's 30 or 32 or 35. It is what it is, and it comes down over time. I have one proposition, for example, to drive home. It's only an illustration, and it is not meant as a real number. But in a way, I actually mean the number, but it's for the government to think. For example, supposing we said that profit before tax of up to 5 lakhs, if an entrepreneur had to pay only 5%, between 5 lakhs to 10 lakhs, if the entrepreneur had to pay only 10%, if between 10 lakhs to 50 lakhs, the progressive tax was only 15%, and between 50 lakhs to 1 crore, if the entrepreneur had to pay only 20%, and if above 1 crore of profit before tax, the entrepreneur pays, say, 30% as it is applicable today. I can tell you, none of the large corporates are going to get any benefit. It will really be tiny and marginal in these mathematics. But for an entrepreneur making only 1 crore of profit, the amount of tax being paid would be really low. That would be one fine way of genuinely giving some direct, substantial benefit to these small entrepreneurs so that they already have disadvantages facing up or squaring up with the large corporates. And they have issues with terms of the unit cost being relatively higher. They have issues with regard to being able to attract the best manpower, and they just have so many issues. And they have, in fact, they pay 16 to 18% rate of interest, while a large entrepreneur pays 8 or 9%. So this would be some way of enabling the small entrepreneur, giving an extra benefit over the large. And therefore, in due course of time, we can hope that many of these people go up the curve, and then they start paying their natural taxes. So this would actually make millions and millions of small entrepreneurs very much happy. And if we do not want to have a arbitrage between personal income tax and the corporate income tax, we can actually merge the two around these rates. Now, the point is therefore philosophical, whether we want to support them at the cost of the larger. I would say yes, and I would certainly say that this would cheer just so many millions of entrepreneurs and traders. And of course, it's not just for companies as we have today. I would actually propose this comes for partnerships, proprietorships, just everybody. If an entrepreneur, small guy, you pay less tax. Now, it's marginal. I suggested some numbers. Let me say that starting at 5% and going up to 20% in a progressive way. The point, therefore, is that when we say that we are talking or building the story for a resilient India, there is a scope for the private sector, or not a scope, in fact, it's imperative for the private sector to play to play the whole role, and the government to play the role of a neutral umpire, an umpire which reduces the scope of crony capitalism, the umpire that facilitates, and for the small entrepreneur to develop, so that the entire ecosystem develops, and then we hope and look forward to be a resilient India and a developed India. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for listening to me patiently on this subject. And once again, I must close the discussion by saying that we are thrilled and excited that our Honorable Minister, Shri Piyush Goyal ji, is here with us. And I just hope that each one of us look forward to his speech today and pick a few thoughts about many of the ideas he may have for us. And for every one of you this afternoon, my very warm wishes and a very happy 2019. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.